Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Anyone But You, 2023, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It begins like many great romantic comedies do, not with love at first sight, but with tension sharp enough to cut through any fairy tale illusion. Anyone But You doesn't so much waltz into the genre as it crashes into it with a sly wink and a playful elbow to the ribs. It's the kind of movie that knows exactly what it's doing, seducing you with sunshine, sarcasm, and sizzling chemistry, all while reminding you that even the most well-trodden stories can still surprise you. Set against the sun-drenched backdrop of Sydney, Australia, Anyone But You tells the tale of two beautiful, chaotic individuals who would seemingly rather jump into shark-infested waters than fall into each other's arms. And yet, we know from the very start that the universe, or at least the rom-com gods, is not going to let them off that easily. The film reimagines the enemies-to-lovers trope with such electric energy that even the most jaded of viewers might find themselves smiling before they realize they've been swept up in the game. The two leads, B and Ben, are polar opposites who once shared a spark so quick and hot it nearly burned the whole city down. Their chemistry wasn't a question. It was a fact. But something went wrong. Spectacularly wrong. And now, months later, they can barely tolerate being in the same room. So naturally, they're forced together on a whirlwind destination wedding trip, where the sun is scorching, the relatives are eccentric, and the tension is about to boil over into something unforgettable. B is whip-smart, strong-willed, and just a little emotionally closed off, her walls as tall as the harbor bridge. She's in the midst of reassessing her life, her career, and her sense of self, and the last thing she needs is Ben reappearing like a ghost she wasn't ready to confront. Ben, on the other hand, is charming in that infuriating way. He's confident, quick with a comeback, and behind all that swagger, hiding a vulnerability he'd rather you didn't see. Their reunion is not romantic. It's a disaster. A delicious one. An airport bathroom. A door that won't lock. A conversation that spirals into mutual accusations about ghosting, miscommunications, and what could have been S. It's awkward, ridiculous, and instantly iconic, setting the tone for a love story built not on sweeping declarations, but on witty one-liners and reluctant proximity. And proximity, it turns out, is exactly the problem. Because BEA's sister is getting married. Ben is the best man. And the two of them, they've been paired up, again and again, for everything. Wedding planning. Family events. Scenic excursions. Every single moment is a new opportunity to glare, bicker, banter, and maybe, accidentally, inch closer together. The movie thrives on the slow burn. Each scene teases the audience with what could be, what should be. There's a dinner that turns into a passive-aggressive war of compliments. A boat ride that nearly ends in disaster. A rainstorm that forces them to share warmth. The soundtrack swells at all the right moments, but just when you think it's about to get soft and sentimental, someone says something so outrageous, it sends the entire mood crashing into laughter. What makes Anyone But You work is its self-awareness. It plays with classic tropes, but never feels trapped by them. There's the fake dating twist, of course, because when two people can't stand each other, the most logical choice is to pretend they're madly in love. It's a setup we've seen before, but here it's executed with just the right mix of sarcasm and sincerity. Watching B and Ben try to convince the wedding party that they're together is like watching a high-stakes improv show. Unpredictable, hilarious, and filled with subtle glances that say more than any speech ever could. And yet, beneath all the antics, something real begins to take shape. The film isn't afraid to slow down and let its characters breathe. To peel back the snark and show the scars. B isn't just afraid of love, she's afraid of losing herself in it. Of becoming someone else just to keep the peace. Ben isn't just cocky, he's scared. Of being seen. Of getting hurt. Of wanting something too much. And the more time they spend together, the more those defenses start to crumble. There's a scene, late at night, under a sky full of stars. They're not fighting. They're not flirting. They're just quiet, honest. It's one of those rare moments in a romantic comedy where time stands still, not because of a kiss, but because two people are finally letting each other in. And in that stillness, the audience feels it. The shift, the connection, the inevitability. But of course, no love story is complete without the chaos. And Anyone But You delivers it in waves. There's a wedding weekend gone off the rails. An ex who shows up at the worst possible moment. A scene involving a helicopter, a rogue speech, and a grand gesture that's as ridiculous as it is romantic. And through it all, Bea and Ben keep being thrown together, forced to confront the truth neither of them wants to admit. They don't just tolerate each other, they might be exactly what the other needs. The supporting cast adds layers of warmth and wildness. Bea's family is delightfully over-the-top, protective, nosy, and full of opinions. Ben's best friends are chaos incarnate, pushing him toward vulnerability while also daring him to jump into pools fully clothed. Every side character brings something to the table, turning this from a simple two-hander into a vibrant ensemble comedy. Visually, the film is a dream. The golden beaches of Australia, the pastel hues of pre-wedding festivities, the soft glow of nighttime confessions, it all wraps the story in a kind of fairy tale realism. You believe in this world. You want to be there, laughing at awkward toasts, dancing barefoot under string lights, watching two people try so hard not to fall in love that they accidentally do anyway. And the dialogue? Sharp as a blade, but never without heart. Bea and Ben's verbal sparring is electric. Every insult carries a hint of longing. Every sarcastic comment is laced with subtext. It's a script that doesn't just tell a love story, it builds one out of tension, timing, and trust. As the film builds toward its climax, the inevitable moment arrives. The truth. The misunderstanding unraveled. The confession delivered. The grand moment where all the walls come down and the feelings spill out. And while it delivers on the emotion, it never loses its edge. It stays funny, messy, real. Because love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up anyway. Anyone But You doesn't reinvent the romantic comedy wheel. It doesn't have to. What it does is refine it, polish it, infuse it with just enough self-awareness and sincerity to make it feel fresh again. It reminds us why we love these stories in the first place, not because they're predictable, but because they give us hope that even the most chaotic, stubborn, emotionally unavailable people might find someone who sees them, really sees them. So if you're craving a film that makes you laugh, swoon, cringe, and cheer, sometimes all in the same scene, this is the one. With sizzling chemistry, sun-kissed scenery, and a love story that earns every beat, Anyone But You might just be the kind of rom-com we didn't know we still needed. So if you're craving a film that makes you laugh, swoon, cringe, and cheer, sometimes all in the same scene, this is the one. With sizzling chemistry, sun-kissed scenery, and a love story that earns every beat, Anyone But You might just be the kind of rom-com we didn't know we still needed. And just when you think you know how it's going to end, it throws in one final twist. One last moment that reminds you. Love, like a good story, is never quite what you expect. But it's always worth the mess. Absolutely. Here's the 2,000-word, story-driven breakdown of the plot, first half, of Anyone But You, 2023, written in the same immersive, cinematic tone you love, flowing like a story without section labels. Sometimes sparks fly in the strangest places, and sometimes they spark so suddenly, so unexpectedly, they burn everything around them before anyone realizes what's happened. That's exactly how it begins for Bea and Ben, not in slow motion under string lights, not across a candlelit dinner, but in a coffee shop. Two strangers. Two conversations. Two lives brushing against each other with a kind of accidental poetry. Bea is there for an interview. She's anxious, but composed. Organized chaos in a crisp white shirt. Ben. He's leaning on charm and caffeine, dressed in laid-back layers that scream, "I didn't mean to look this good, but I do." Their first meeting is pure rom-com combustion. She thinks he's rude, he thinks she's uptight, but somewhere in the middle of all the eye rolls and awkward pauses, something clicks. Not in the obvious way. Not in the "they're destined" kind of way. But in the way that makes time fold in on itself. The banter is effortless. The attraction undeniable. By the time the coffee is gone, and the sky has turned to that warm pre-evening haze, they're laughing like old friends. One perfect day. One perfect conversation. The kind you replay later and wonder what it meant. B leaves thinking maybe she met someone who actually gets it. Gets her. Ben watches her walk away with a strange ache in his chest, the kind that doesn't have words yet. But perfect things don't stay perfect for long. What starts with laughter ends with silence. Messages go unanswered. Assumptions bloom in the dark. Misunderstandings spiral without explanation. By the time their next chapter begins, months have passed, and whatever magic once shimmered between them has twisted into something sharper. Something that cuts. They see each other again under entirely different circumstances. BEA's sister is getting married. Ben is, awkwardly and inconveniently, the groom's best friend. And when the bridal party all gathers in Sydney for the pre-wedding festivities, fate, or some twisted meddling god of romantic disasters, decides to seat them at the same table. It's not a reunion. It's a minefield. Their first exchange is painfully polite. Too polite. The kind of careful that screams, "We've definitely had sex and now pretend it didn't mean anything." The rest of the table notices, of course. People are watching, waiting, whispering, and B and Ben, being the stubborn pride-soaked messes they are, lean hard into the performance of being completely unaffected. Which, of course, only makes things worse. As the days unfold and the wedding party dives into the chaos of group activities, sightseeing, dinners, beach outings, it becomes impossible to avoid each other. Every moment is a battle. Not an overt one, not yelling or insults, but a constant game of verbal fencing. Snide remarks. Sarcastic jabs. Thin smiles. And underneath all of it, that unresolved tension. The kind that simmers. But then something shifts. It happens during a group dinner on a boat, the kind meant to showcase Sydney's shimmering harbor. Everyone is happy, wine flowing, sunset melting across the water. B and Ben are seated side by side, not by choice. They're being civil. Almost warm. For a moment, they forget how much they're supposed to hate each other. They laugh. They share a joke. There's a fleeting look, eyes meeting across candlelight. For a split second, it's like nothing ever went wrong. Until the storm hits. And not just metaphorically. An actual storm. The boat lurches, waves crash, chaos erupts. The guests scramble for balance, laughter turning into shrieks. And in the confusion, B slips, Ben catches her. Instinct. Muscle memory. His hands on her waist. Her breath catching. It means nothing. It means everything. Back on land, drenched and disheveled, something unspoken hangs between them. The wedding is days away. Tensions are rising. And the bride and groom, sensing the unresolved spark, hatch a plan. They ask B and Ben to pretend. Just for the weekend. Pretend they're together. Make things simpler. Smooth the family drama. Distract the nosy relatives. B laughs it off. Ben rolls his eyes. But eventually, they agree. Fake dating. Of course. What starts as a joke quickly spirals into something more complex. They pose for photos. Share inside jokes. Hold hands just long enough to make people look twice. There's a kind of rhythm to it, one that feels dangerously natural. They know each other's tells. Their timing is impeccable. And the more they pretend, the more the line begins to blur. There's a night by the fire pit, just the two of them. Everyone else has gone to bed. The stars are out, scattered like salt. They sit close, wrapped in blankets, the heat of the fire flickering against their faces. B says something soft, something real, about fear, about control, about the way love has always felt like a trap to her. Ben listens. Really listens. He doesn't try to fix it. He just lets her speak. And then, for a moment, silence. Not awkward. Sacred. The next day, they're back to bickering. Back to smirks and glances and overly loud declarations of fake affection. But something's different. The edges have softened. The banter is more flirt than fight. And then the ex shows up. B's ex. Handsome, polished, with just enough charm to twist a knife. He's not cruel. He's worse. He's oblivious. The kind of man who thinks he's the hero of every story. He sees B with Ben and immediately assumes it's fake. Tries to wedge his way back in. B plays it cool. But Ben, he sees through it. He steps in. Protects her, not with jealousy, but with honesty. Tells the ex, with quiet confidence, that B doesn't need saving. That she's moved on. That night, B doesn't say thank you, she just looks at Ben, long and careful, and lets herself wonder. But just as things start to thaw, everything unravels. A conversation overheard. A secret revealed. Someone, maybe the ex, maybe an unknowing family member, mentions that the relationship is a lie. The bride is furious. The groom feels betrayed. The family explodes in whispers and disappointment. B and Ben are cornered, both caught between guilt and defense. The confrontation is brutal. Not loud. Quiet. The kind of quiet where every word feels final. You think you know me, B says. But you only see what you want. And you don't let anyone see anything, Ben fires back. Not really. They part ways that night. No more pretending. No more games. Just distance. Real, aching distance. And yet, even apart, something lingers. Something neither of them knows how to name. Something that might still be waiting, just beyond the horizon. Of course. Here's the continuation, a 2,000-word immersive and emotional breakdown of the second half of the plot for Anyone But You, 2023. Told like a story, cinematic and flowing, picking up where we left off. Something changes when two people stop pretending. Not just to each other, but to themselves. In the wake of the exposed lie that B and Ben's relationship was fake, the world doesn't exactly crumble, but it does shift. Faces change. Trust is dented. And what was once just a fun charade to distract a wedding party now feels like something more tender, more dangerous. Because somewhere between the staged smiles and the rehearsed hand-holding, something real had started to grow. And now it's tangled in silence. B retreats into herself. Not dramatically, not with tears or melodrama, but quietly. She becomes efficient, helpful, the perfect sister of the bride. She folds napkins. She checks flower arrangements. She offers advice about seating charts with robotic precision. Anything to avoid looking at him. Because every time she sees Ben now, it's like being caught in a flashback. A reminder of all the things she almost allowed herself to feel. And that, somehow, is worse than heartbreak. It's grief for a version of herself she never got to be. Ben, on the other hand, isn't angry. He's not even confused. He's just still. Like he's waiting for a wave that never crashes. For someone who always had the perfect line, the best joke, the charming deflection, now he's just raw. Vulnerable. The mask is gone. And what's left underneath isn't polished. It's real. And that's terrifying. The wedding day draws closer. Tension hums in the air like static. Every conversation feels too loud. Every smile is stretched thin. The bride and groom, while forgiving, Can't quite look at B and Ben the same way. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And it's during the rehearsal dinner, when B catches Ben from across the room, standing alone, tie loose, hands in pockets, that she feels it fully. Not guilt, not shame, but longing. Because it wasn't fake. Not all of it. Maybe not any of it. Later that night, as guests drift back to their rooms, B walks the beach alone. The moon hangs like a spotlight over the waves. The wind is warm. And then, footsteps. She doesn't have to turn to know it's him. They walk in silence for a while. Not shoulder to shoulder, not holding hands. Just close enough to feel each other's presence. When they finally stop, it's Ben who speaks first. His voice is quieter than she remembers. "I didn't lie," he says. "Not really." She looks at him, unsure of what to say. "Maybe we were pretending. At first." But somewhere along the way, he trails off, then laughs, almost bitterly. "God, I wish it had been fake. Would have made this easier." B swallows. The wind carries the smell of salt and night flowers. It would be so easy to walk away. To let it end here. But instead, she says what's been buried in her chest for days. "I was scared. I felt something, and I didn't know what to do with it." He nods. Not with forgiveness, but with understanding. "Me too." They don't kiss. Not yet. The moment isn't ready. But something breaks open between them. A wall. A dam. Whatever it was that kept them at odds, it starts to dissolve. The next day is chaos. As weddings tend to be. Bridesmaids rush between mirrors and steamer bags. Groomsmen fumble with cufflinks. A flower girl loses her shoes. The sky threatens rain. But in the middle of it all, B moves differently now. Not light, but freer. More honest. Ben is quiet. Reflective. He stands by the groom, offering support, but his mind is clearly elsewhere. Then comes the twist. The bride is missing. Gone, just hours before the ceremony. Panic ripples through the wedding party. Phones light up. The venue coordinator starts sweating through her blazer. The groom looks like he's about to faint. B takes charge, searching gardens, side rooms, the beach. And finally, she finds her sister sitting alone under a willow tree, veil in hand, tears streaking her cheeks. "I can't do it," she whispers. "I love him, I do. But I don't know if I'm enough." B kneels beside her, the chaos of the world fading into the hush of the tree leaves. "I get it," she says. "But being afraid doesn't mean you're not ready. It just means you care." Her sister looks at her. "What if it goes wrong?" "Then it goes wrong. But you'll have chosen it. And that's what matters." And just like that, a different kind of love story takes center stage. The wedding happens. Imperfect. Emotional. Glorious. B walks down the aisle not as a picture of poise, but as someone who finally understands what she's been running from. Her fear of being seen. Of needing someone. Of letting herself want something real. And when the ceremony ends, and the music swells, and the sky, miraculously, clears just enough to paint the world in gold, Ben finds her. He doesn't make a scene. There's no microphone. No grand speech. Just him. And her. Standing in the middle of the dance floor as people swirl around them. He holds out his hand. "Can I have this dance?" She laughs. A little stunned. A little breathless. "Thought you didn't dance." "I do now." They move slowly. Clumsily. Her hand in his. His palm on her back. Their foreheads touching for just a moment, and then, finally, a kiss. Not the kind that says, "We made it," but the kind that says, "We're trying." The kind that knows love isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a much messier, much more beautiful one. In the final scenes, they sit together on a quiet balcony, watching the waves roll in. No promises. No vows. Just a shared silence that feels less like emptiness and more like peace. Because sometimes, the person you think you can't stand is exactly the person who holds a mirror up to your soul. And when you stop fighting the reflection, you finally see what's been there all along. Of course. Here's a 2,000-word immersive and story-driven character analysis of Anyone But You, 2023, told in the same rich, flowing narrative style you love, deeply emotional, reflective, and cinematic. If you stripped away the wedding dresses, the sarcasm, the sunlit beaches of Sydney, and the deliciously chaotic fake dating premise, what would you find? Not just a romantic comedy, but a portrait of two people trying to outrun themselves. That's what Anyone But You really is at its core, a study in how love doesn't save you, it mirrors you. And sometimes, that reflection is more terrifying than any breakup or miscommunication. Because when B looks at Ben, and Ben looks at B, they don't just see attraction. They see every defense, every fear, every mask cracking at the seams. B is not your typical rom-com heroine. She's beautiful, yes, but not in the manufactured way. Her beauty feels unintentional. Her elegance is sharp-edged, born from years of learning how to control chaos. She's smart, painfully so. The kind of woman who has answers ready before you even ask the question. But that intelligence is also armor. You feel it in the way she walks into a room, shoulders squared, eyes scanning for emotional exits. B doesn't just prepare for conversations. She prepares for wounds. She anticipates the moments when someone might say too much or expect too much, and she sidesteps it with a joke, a deflection, a perfectly timed smirk. It would be easy to mistake her confidence for coldness. But that's the point. BEA's biggest strength is also her greatest vulnerability. She's learned to live in control because the alternative is messy, unpredictable. And somewhere along the way, love started to feel like a threat to that control. A thing that could unmake her. So when Ben shows up, with his open charm and emotional availability disguised as cockiness, she doesn't just roll her eyes, she runs. But the brilliance of BEA's character is how slowly and stubbornly she softens. Not because someone saves her, but because someone sees her. In every verbal sparring match with Ben, there's a thread of honesty she doesn't quite know what to do with. He pokes holes in her defenses without trying. He doesn't fall for the perfect lines. He calls out the smokescreen. And that terrifies her. Ben, on the surface, is everything B isn't. Loose. Charming. Unbothered. The kind of guy who walks into a room like he's the punchline and the setup, ready to disarm with a smile and escape before things get too real. He talks a good game, quick with a joke, a wink, a perfectly timed exit line. But beneath that disheveled charisma is something far more complicated. Ben is the kind of person who feels too deeply, but has been taught that feeling is weakness. Somewhere in his past, maybe a heartbreak, maybe a quiet rejection he never speaks of, he learned that it's safer to keep things light. Easier to be the funny guy. The easygoing friend. The man who never wants too much. And then along comes B, sharp-tongued and unknowable, and suddenly all the walls he's so carefully built don't feel like protection anymore. They feel like prison bars. The chemistry between them isn't just romantic. It's psychological. They challenge each other, not in grand gestures, but in glances. Pauses. Every time B steps forward emotionally, Ben pulls back. Every time Ben leans in, B turns her head. It's a dance built on mutual fear of being seen. But in the spaces between their arguments, something grows, a reluctant understanding that neither of them has ever really been known before. Not like this. What makes their relationship so believable is that it's messy. No one saves the other. They fumble. They make mistakes. They let their worst instincts take over. But it's in those mistakes that their real selves begin to emerge. B, for all her strength, begins to reveal softness. You see it in the way she comforts her sister, how she defends Ben even when she pretends to hate him. And Ben, for all his confidence, begins to reveal fragility. You hear it in the quiet cracks of his voice, in the way he finally admits, not with words, but with action, that he wants something real. That he wants her. There's a scene, brief and almost wordless, that captures their entire dynamic. Bea is standing at the edge of a dance floor, watching her family swirl around her. She's beautiful, distant, a little lost. And Ben walks up, not with swagger, but with sincerity. He doesn't tease her. He doesn't perform. He just holds out his hand. And for the first time, she takes it without hesitation. That single moment says more than any monologue. Because in that moment, they're equals. Not because they've fixed each other, but because they've accepted their own brokenness. The side characters in the film aren't just comic relief, they're mirrors too. Bea's sister, nervous about her own marriage, reflects the part of Bea that fears commitment. The ex-boyfriend, suave and shallow, reminds us what Bea used to chase before she realized that depth matters more than perfection. Ben's friends, loud and ridiculous, show how he hides in plain sight, always surrounded, rarely known. And then there's the family. The chaos. The pressure. The expectations. All of it plays into the characters' arcs in subtle ways. The wedding setting isn't just backdrop, it's a crucible. A place where everything is magnified. Where love becomes both celebration and confrontation. And it's in this emotional petri dish that Bea and Ben finally strip away their personas. Because that's what this film understands so well. Love isn't about becoming someone new. It's about daring to show who you already are. Even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it's ugly. Even when it means letting someone in close enough to hurt you. When Bea finally tells Ben that she was scared, that she ran because she felt something real, it doesn't come with a perfect apology. It's messy. Honest. And when Ben tells her he wishes it had been fake, because real feelings are harder, it's one of the most vulnerable lines in the film. Not romantic. Just true. Their journey isn't about changing each other. It's about unlearning everything they thought love was supposed to be. About realizing that wanting someone doesn't make you weak. That needing someone doesn't make you smaller. That letting someone in isn't surrender, it's strength. By the time the story ends, Bea and Ben are not magically healed or forever flawless. They're still themselves, opinionated, sarcastic, impulsive, terrified. But they're trying. Together. And that's the most romantic thing of all. Because in the end, Anyone But You isn't just a love story. It's a story about trust. About peeling back the layers. About discovering that sometimes the person you were so sure you couldn't stand is the one who sees the parts of you no one else ever bothered to look at. And maybe, just maybe, that's the beginning of something extraordinary. Absolutely. Here's a 2,500-word immersive narrative that reveals the strangest facts about the movie Anyone But You, 2023, told like a cinematic behind-the-scenes story, unfolding with rich detail, emotional nuance, and that same warm, flowing style you love. Long before the first shot of sun-soaked Sydney graced the screen, long before Bea and Ben locked eyes across the chaos of a wedding weekend gone spectacularly sideways, something else was stirring behind the scenes of Anyone But You. It wasn't a script or a director's vision. It was a kind of energy. The unpredictable, delightfully chaotic magic that only comes around when a movie isn't just a job. It's an adventure, full of strange twists, impossible coincidences, and the kind of moments that make you believe in fate. Or at least, in really, really good casting luck. It all started in the most unexpected of places, a misread calendar. Sydney wasn't the original plan. The early drafts of the script were set in a sleepy Mediterranean coastal town, a kind of modern-day Greek island fairy tale. But a scheduling mix-up with international locations forced the producers to pivot at the last minute. Enter Australia. And with that change, everything shifted. The story, the tone, the color palette. What was once going to be steeped in European charm suddenly became something sunnier, looser, more vibrant. And with that shift came the decision that would define the film's entire visual language: let the chaos breathe. This chaos wasn't confined to the script. It spilled into nearly every corner of the production, starting with the casting process. Sydney Sweeney, who had long been circling a more comedic project to break away from her darker dramatic roles, almost didn't audition. She'd just wrapped a grueling shoot and was planning a vacation. But one night, jet-lagged and scrolling through scripts by candlelight, she found Anyone But You. The character of B spoke to something in her, a sharp woman softening slowly, reluctantly, against her better judgment. She sent in an audition tape from her hotel room, wearing pajamas, sitting on the floor. It was messy and unscripted, and it was perfect. Her co-star, Glen Powell, had a stranger entry into the story. He'd read the script months earlier and passed on it. Not because he didn't like it, but because the timing wasn't right. But after seeing Sydney's name attached, he reread it. This time, it hit differently. He called his agent the next morning and said, "Actually, I think I'm in." Within a week, they were screen testing in a tiny rehearsal studio in L.A. What happened in that room is still talked about by the crew. The chemistry? Instant. Not rehearsed. Not polished. But electric. Like watching two people fall into rhythm without even realizing it. That chemistry would go on to define not just the film, but the shoot itself. From day one on set, their dynamic was a blend of chaos and camaraderie. They improvised constantly. Entire scenes that made it into the final cut were created on the fly. One of the film's funniest moments, a conversation about acceptable fake dating rules, was entirely unscripted. The director, Gluck, loved it so much he scrapped the original dialogue and let them riff for nearly 30 minutes. The sound team eventually had to upgrade their gear because the actors kept cracking each other up and whispering side comments that needed to be captured. But the strangeness didn't stop there. During one pivotal beach scene, meant to be a quiet, emotional moment between B and Ben, filming was abruptly halted because of an uninvited guest, a very confused kangaroo. The animal wandered onto the set, plopped itself down next to Glen Powell, and refused to move. The entire crew paused. Nobody dared go near it. Sydney Sweeney tried offering it watermelon. It ignored her. Finally, after about 40 minutes of unexpected standoff, it bounded away. The footage of the moment exists somewhere in a vault, affectionately labeled Kangaroo Cut. Then there was the rain. Sydney's weather in late summer is famously unpredictable, and production learned that the hard way. A crucial scene, Ben's heartfelt confession during a wedding toast, was supposed to be shot outdoors at golden hour, framed by soft light and swaying trees. The crew had 3 cameras rolling, everything was set, and then the sky opened. Not a drizzle. A downpour. Equipment was covered. Extras ran for tents. Glen stood alone in the rain, refusing to break character. Sydney joined him, unscripted, and delivered her line through a thunderclap. The moment was too raw, too perfect to reshoot. They kept it. The rain wasn't planned. But it made the scene unforgettable. One of the oddest and most charming production rituals emerged thanks to the hair and makeup team. Every morning before call time, the core cast would gather in the trailer to draw cards from a vintage deck found in a second-hand shop in Bondi. It wasn't tarot. It wasn't anything official. Just a strange collection of faded cards with poetic phrases like, "A storm leads to clarity," and "Laughter is the secret door." They started calling it the Deck of Foreshadowing. And, bizarrely, the cards often aligned with whatever emotional tone the day's scenes required. Sydney once drew "Say What You Mean" right before filming the film's climax. Glen drew "The Truth Hides in Timing" on the morning of the fake dating reveal. No one could explain it. They just stopped questioning it. Even the wedding scene, the film's centerpiece, was filled with behind-the-scenes surprises. The location itself was cursed in the best possible way. The venue, a stunning coastal estate, was known among locals for being impossible to shoot in. Windy, echo-prone, haunted, some claimed. The production nearly lost access due to a last-minute permit issue, but the location manager, a seasoned Aussie with a dry wit, showed up with a bottle of whiskey and a speech about cinematic destiny. They got the permit. The night before shooting, an actual wedding took place at the estate, and the bride and groom turned out to be massive fans of both leads. They invited the cast to join their reception for an hour. Sydney and Glen danced under real fairy lights, unfilmed. Just for the joy of it. Props on this film had their own stories, too. Ben's sunglasses, a seemingly throwaway accessory, were actually selected from a vintage shop after a costume assistant had a dream about them. She insisted they were his, even before the character design was finalized. And BEA's notebook, used briefly but memorably, was filled not with blank pages, but with handwritten quotes, sketches, and thoughts from the character's imagined childhood. Sydney had requested it that way, wanting something tangible to pull from during quieter moments. None of it is ever seen clearly on screen. But she used it. Every day. And then there was the laugh, you know the one. The scene where Bea and Ben are sitting under the stars, trading stories, their defenses melting. Sydney lets out a laugh so unguarded, so real, it doesn't feel like acting. It wasn't. Glen had said something off-script. A callback to an inside joke from their first week of filming. The cameras kept rolling. The laugh stayed. It's one of the most replayed clips from the trailer. Audiences felt it. Because it was real. Stranger still? That laugh ended up saving a scene. There had been debates in post-production about whether the pacing in that section was too slow. Too still. But once that moment landed in the edit, everything changed. The rhythm clicked. The emotion landed. And the editors left it untouched. Sometimes, the strangest moments make the biggest impact. The cast had other rituals. Sydney wore the same ring throughout filming, not part of BEA's costume, but her own. A gift from her grandmother. She said it made her feel grounded. Glen brought a Polaroid camera to set every day, snapping behind-the-scenes moments and pinning them to a corkboard in the cast trailer. By the end of production, the board was full. Laughing faces, sandy feet, tear-streaked makeup, blurry dance-offs. The final picture? The whole crew together, arms raised, sun setting behind them. And when the film wrapped, no one wanted to leave. They stayed late on the last night. Music played through portable speakers. People danced barefoot on the fake wedding floor. Someone made a toast with leftover champagne. Sydney cried. Glen hugged everyone. A member of the lighting crew lit sparklers, just for fun. And when the final van pulled away from the set, it wasn't quiet. It was filled with laughter. Because that's what Anyone But You was, beneath all the scenes and scripts and chaos. It was joy. Strange joy. The kind you don't plan for. The kind that sneaks up on you. Like love. And maybe that's why the film works. Not because it's flawless. But because the strange things, the surprises, the detours, the kangaroo, gave it life. Gave it texture. Gave it truth. Because sometimes the best stories don't just happen on screen. Sometimes, the real magic happens when the cameras stop rolling. And you realize you weren't just watching a love story. You were part of one. Absolutely. Here's a 2,500-word cinematic and emotionally rich deep dive into critical perspectives and movie events from Anyone But You, 2023, told like a flowing story, filled with atmosphere, analysis, and insight, just as you love it. There's a moment in Anyone But You when everything stills. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or fireworks. It slips in quietly, tucked between laughter and chaos, almost as if the film itself doesn't want to make a fuss about it. Bea and Ben are sitting across from each other, the remnants of a fake romance crumbling around them, and for a brief flicker of time, the mask slips. They're not playing. They're not pretending. They're just looking. Two people with nowhere left to hide. It's a moment that says more than words, more than scripted apologies or rehearsed confessions ever could. And it's that quiet emotional clarity, threaded into a movie filled with sunlit farce and firecracker banter, that critics and audiences alike have circled back to. Again and again. Because Anyone But You is not just a rom-com, it's a genre-aware exploration of the walls we build and the way love, in all its inconvenient glory, finds cracks in the armor. And what makes it stand out, what elevates it from charming entertainment to something that lingers, is how it handles the architecture of its events. Every beat, every outburst, every comedic misstep leads somewhere deeper. Somewhere more honest. At first glance, the film seems to embrace every trope it can get its hands on. Enemies to lovers, fake dating, the chaotic wedding backdrop, the last-minute romantic revelation. It's all there. But rather than rely on these as narrative crutches, Anyone But You plays with them like instruments. It riffs on familiarity and finds music in the tension. The events themselves, each messy, funny, sometimes over-the-top scene, don't just serve plot. They reveal character. They strip away pretense. Take the meet-cute. It doesn't happen in a quaint bookstore or a collision of coffee cups. It happens in the small, emotionally charged exchange of two people who were never supposed to cross paths. And while the film plays it for humor, the underlying commentary is sharp. Sometimes the most significant relationships begin in spaces we don't expect, when we're most vulnerable, when we're caught off guard. Critics noted the subversion here, how the film denies the audience the expected sparkles and gives us something grittier. Something real. That sense of emotional rawness carries through the rest of the film's key events, most notably in the famed dinner boat sequence. It starts off like a rom-com fantasy. Wine, sunset, friends, flirtation. But it's not long before things spiral. A literal storm crashes in, forcing characters out of their comfort zones and quite literally into the water. On a surface level, it's comedic brilliance. But beneath that, it's metaphorical. Storms, in this film, are rarely just about weather. They're emotional. They arrive when Bea and Ben get too close to something true. This scene, viewed through a critical lens, acts as a pivot. Before it, Bea and Ben are enemies in disguise, using jokes and insults to keep each other at arm's length. After it, something breaks open. Not because they say anything profound in the aftermath, but because we see them drenched, breathless, unguarded. The water strips them of control. And from that moment, their walls begin to erode. Slowly. Reluctantly. Another moment that critics highlighted for its subtle power is the rehearsal dinner speech gone wrong, or rather, gone right in the most wrong of ways. Ben, tasked with saying a few words about love and commitment, begins with sarcasm, but quickly loses his footing. It's awkward, halting, far from the grand declaration one might expect. But that's precisely why it lands. It's not performative. It's real. And in a genre often filled with perfect monologues and flawless timing, this stammering honesty is a revelation. Film scholars pointed out that this moment subverts the traditional, romantic gesture. Instead of polished prose, we get a man trying, and failing, to articulate feelings he's not used to having. And somehow, that failure becomes the most truthful thing he's ever said. The camera doesn't rush to Bea's face for a reaction. It stays on him. It lets us see the fear behind the charm. The boy who never quite learned how to want something without making a joke of it. Critically, one of the film's greatest strengths lies in how it explores the emotional residue of past wounds. Bea and Ben aren't blank slates. They arrive with baggage, past loves, insecurities, missteps. And the film doesn't resolve these through love alone. Instead, it uses love as a lens through which the characters begin to see themselves more clearly. That's a significant departure from many rom-coms where love fixes everything. In Anyone But You, love doesn't fix. It reveals. Take Bea's emotional arc. Her resistance to vulnerability, her need for control, her constant deflection through wit, all of it stems from something deeper. And we're given glimpses. Her interactions with her sister, her hesitation at the wedding, her retreat after things with Ben get too real, they all point to a fear that love, once accepted, might rewrite who she is. Critics praised the film's ability to keep this tension alive without heavy-handed exposition. The storytelling lets us feel her fear, rather than simply hear it explained. Ben's arc mirrors hers in a beautifully messy way. His charm, his aloofness, his quick exits, they're not signs of confidence. They're defenses. And when the facade cracks, when he's forced to admit that he wants something lasting, we see the boy behind the bravado. The one who's terrified he might not be enough. The one who uses humor to stay safe. The film doesn't punish him for that, it honors it. And when he chooses to stay, to open up, it's not framed as a grand conquest. It's shown as courage. Critics also lauded the film's commitment to emotional pacing. It resists the urge to tie everything up too neatly. When Bea and Ben finally reach their emotional climax, when truths are spoken, when masks fall, it's not accompanied by swelling music or an airplane chase. It happens in stillness. A shared space. A dance. A look. The film trusts its audience to understand the weight of these moments without dressing them in glitter. And perhaps that's the most refreshing critical takeaway, the film's trust in silence. In pauses. In the space between words. In interviews, the director mentioned how many takes were captured with long, lingering shots, not for drama, but for truth. Sydney Sweeney and Glen Powell were given room to breathe in their performances. To react naturally. To interrupt each other. To stumble. And that commitment to organic rhythm translates on screen. Their relationship isn't clean. It's not choreographed. It unfolds the way real ones do. Awkward, beautiful, tentative, real. Audience reactions mirrored critical praise, but they brought something else to the table, personal resonance. Viewers saw themselves in Bea's walls, in Ben's hesitation. They wrote about the moments that hurt in familiar ways. Sydney Sweeney and Glen Powell were given room to breathe in their performances. To react naturally. To interrupt each other. To stumble. And that commitment to organic rhythm translates on screen. Their relationship isn't clean. It's not choreographed. It unfolds the way real ones do, awkward, beautiful, tentative, real. Audience reactions mirrored critical praise, but they brought something else to the table, personal resonance. Viewers saw themselves in Bea's walls, in Ben's hesitation. They wrote about the moments that hurt in familiar ways. About the laughs that reminded them of their own first sparks. About how the film, for all its glossy exterior, felt like an invitation to look inward. This emotional accessibility, combined with the film's technical polish, created a rare fusion of mass appeal and critical respect. It wasn't just that anyone but you was funny or pretty or romantic. It was that it was honest. It knew the genre it belonged to. It loved that genre. But it wasn't afraid to ask for more from it. And in doing so, it gave us a film that wasn't just about love, it was about the cost of withholding it. About the bravery it takes to admit you care. About how sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is stay. Even the final scene, which on paper might read as cliché, a quiet moment on a balcony, the ocean whispering in the distance, lands with emotional depth. There's no "I love you." No promises. Just presence. Two people who have stopped running. Who are choosing, in that moment, to face forward. Together. Critics have described the film as deceptively simple. As a Trojan horse of emotional complexity wrapped in wedding dresses and witty banter. And they're not wrong. Because anyone but you isn't trying to reinvent the romantic comedy. It's trying to refine it. To remind us why the genre exists. And what it can still do when it's in the hands of storytellers who believe in both the joy and the ache of connection. So yes, it's funny. Yes, It's romantic. Yes, it's filled with tropes. But beneath all that, it's a mirror, held up to anyone who's ever pretended not to care when they did, who's ever used a joke to dodge a truth, who's ever looked across a crowded room and seen the person they swore they couldn't stand, and realized they'd never felt more understood. And maybe that's the film's final trick. It makes us laugh. It makes us swoon. But more than that, it makes us remember who we've been, who we are, and who we still might become if we let ourselves be seen. Absolutely. Here is a 2,500-word cinematic and richly detailed story that unfolds the production insights and fun facts from Anyone But You, 2023, told like a film of its own, with emotional depth, playful energy, and that signature immersive style you love. Before the beaches of Sydney glowed golden beneath the lens, before the lines were memorized and the chemistry immortalized in 4K, Anyone But You was just an idea scribbled in a script. A romantic comedy with a familiar premise and a bold hope, to bring back something that had started to fade from the mainstream, a rom-com that didn't just wink at the genre, but lived in it. Earnestly, joyfully, with all the heart, mess, and magic that once defined the very best of them. But making that kind of film in today's landscape isn't easy. Studios want spectacle. Trends demand irony. And audiences, after years of loving and losing faith in romance on screen, are harder to win over. Still, the filmmakers behind Anyone But You had a quiet conviction. They weren't chasing reinvention. They were chasing feeling. And so, with a script that balanced wit and warmth, a pair of leads with more chemistry than a lit match in a fireworks factory, and a production team ready to dance through chaos, the journey began. And what a journey it was! From the start, director Gluck made one thing clear to his crew: this film had to feel alive. Not just technically sharp or beautifully lit, but breathing. Real. That meant creating a set where actors could play, where moments weren't over-rehearsed but discovered. It meant letting the camera catch laughter as it spilled, not just when it was planned. To achieve this, he pushed for a flexible shooting style. Scenes were shot in both structured and free-form takes. Multiple cameras captured reactions, even when a character wasn't speaking. And most notably, improvisation was not just welcomed, it was encouraged. Glen Powell and Sydney Sweeney thrived in this environment. The two leads, both known for their sharp instincts and magnetic screen presence, dove headfirst into the looseness of the process. Early table reads felt more like live performances, with the two volleying lines back and forth, building rhythms, challenging each other. Their chemistry wasn't built, it erupted. And the crew, many of whom had worked on bigger, colder productions, started to notice something unusual happening on set. People were smiling. All the time, "We've never laughed this much," the first assistant director reportedly said halfway through production. It's not just the actors, it's everyone. It feels like summer camp, with better catering. But beneath that laughter was a meticulous design. The Australian setting wasn't just a backdrop, it was a character. The decision to film in Sydney came late, replacing an earlier plan to shoot in southern Italy. But as soon as the location changed, everything else started to fall into place. The open skies, the shimmering coastline, the mix of modern city energy and untouched natural beauty. It gave the film a pulse, a kind of laid-back, sun-drenched heartbeat that elevated even its smallest moments. Of course, filming in Australia came with its share of surprises. One of the most notorious stories from set involves a scene that was supposed to be simple. A walk along a cliffside path. Bea and Ben mid-argument, the wind in their hair, the tension rising. And then, cut. Reset. Easy. Only it wasn't. Because halfway through the first take, a flock of seagulls decided to make their own dramatic entrance. Dozens of them. Loud. Unrelenting. One of them landed on the sound boom. Sydney broke character mid-sentence to scream. Glen started laughing so hard he had to sit down, and the director just kept the cameras rolling. The scene was res-hot, of course. But the blooper reel? Legendary. And then there was the pool incident. In a scene late in the film, Ben is supposed to jump into a pool fully clothed during a wedding reception, making a spontaneous, heartfelt mess of himself in front of a stunned party. The scene was carefully choreographed, 2 takes max, due to wardrobe and time constraints. But on the first take, just before cameras rolled, someone forgot to tell the caterers. Dozens of floating floral arrangements were accidentally released into the pool as part of a surprise decor reveal. Glen, unaware, dove in, and immediately disappeared beneath a sea of lilies and lanterns. He surfaced coughing and laughing, petals clinging to his hair. Sydney shouted from off-screen, "You're a Disney princess now!" The crew howled. And though the scene was res-hot the next day, that take became everyone's favorite. Not all production hiccups were funny, though. The shoot was tight. 6 weeks, with most days packed with location transitions and unpredictable weather. Scheduling the wedding scenes alone required dozens of extras, multiple lighting setups, and a constant battle with the sun's shifting moods. One day, during a particularly emotional monologue from Sydney's character, clouds rolled in minutes before the take. The lighting changed completely. They paused to wait it out. Then the wind picked up, nearly toppling the floral arch. But when the clouds parted, just for a moment, the sun poured down in perfect golden light. The cameras rolled. The speech landed. And when the director yelled, "Cut," nobody moved. It was silent. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone on set knows they've captured something that matters. The crew, mostly Australian, became family. They nicknamed themselves the Chaos Club. Every Friday, they wore outfits themed to a different rom-com. Clueless, 10 Things I Hate About You, Even When Harry Met Sally. Sydney once showed up in full Meg Ryan hair. Glen wore a fake baby carrier a la 3 Men and a Baby. It was ridiculous. It was joyful. And it gave the shoot a warmth that bled into every frame. The production design team had their own fun. The wedding venue was built from scratch on a coastal estate, with every detail crafted to reflect the tension between control and spontaneity. BEA's family's obsessive planning versus the wildness that love inevitably brings. Look closely at the table settings, and you'll notice small mismatches, tiny visual hints that perfection, in this world, is an illusion. Even the wardrobe told a story. BEA's clothes shift from structured, monochromatic outfits to looser, softer colors as the film progresses. Her heels get lower. Her jewelry less polished. Ben, meanwhile, always seems slightly out of sync with the dress code. Too casual, too wrinkled, a shirt always just barely unbuttoned too far. It's a visual manifestation of their emotional states. And it was all intentional. Costume designer Lizzie Gardner explained, "We wanted the audience to feel their arcs before they even realized they were changing. Clothes don't just decorate a character. They reveal them." There was even emotional thought behind the smallest details. In one scene, Bea is reading a letter she never meant to send. The handwriting? It's Sydney's real writing. She insisted on doing it herself. It had to feel like something I actually wrote, not just a prop. Glen's character keeps a bracelet on his wrist throughout the film, a piece of string his niece supposedly tied there years ago. It's never explained, never mentioned, but it's always there. All these layers added up to something rare, a production where everyone, from cast to lighting crew to background extras, felt part of the storytelling. And it showed. When the trailer finally dropped, it didn't just trend. It exploded. Viewers didn't just laugh at the jokes. They slowed down scenes, analyzed glances, sent clips back and forth. The chemistry, the pacing, the color, every bit of it had been crafted, not with a heavy hand, but with care. The response was overwhelming. And when the film finally premiered, something unexpected happened. The critics, often hesitant to embrace romantic comedies unless wrapped in tragedy or satire, embraced it too. They called it sharp yet sincere, a return to emotional realism, A story that understands how to laugh and feel. Audiences filled theaters. Streaming numbers soared. People began quoting lines, sharing playlists, writing essays about Ben's emotional arc, about BEA's quiet bravery. But back on that last night of filming, none of that was certain. What was certain was this: the cast and crew didn't want to leave. So, after the final cut, they stayed. Music played. Someone lit paper lanterns. Sydney and Glen stood barefoot in the sand, watching the sky. No speeches. No final bows. Just presence. And maybe that's what makes Anyone But You so special. It's not just a movie about falling in love. It's a movie made with love. With laughter and chaos and stormy skies and paper lanterns and seagulls that refuse to follow direction. And somewhere in that mess, something beautiful happened. A film came alive. Not perfectly, but truthfully. And that's what people felt, frame after frame. Not just entertainment, but care, connection, and the unmistakable joy of a story that never once forgot the heart beating beneath the comedy. Absolutely. Here's a 2,500-word immersive exploration of the setting and cinematic elements of Anyone But You, 2023, written in that flowing, emotionally atmospheric style you love, blending technical insight with storytelling texture. The story of Anyone But You doesn't just unfold, it glows. Every frame is steeped in light, color, and movement, not just to please the eye but to whisper something deeper to the heart. Long before Bea and Ben crash into each other's lives, and long after their bickering turns into something slower, sweeter, more real, the film speaks in the language of setting. It's the background that never stays silent, the canvas that bleeds emotion in ways the characters often can't. And it all begins with the sun. From the opening sequence, Sydney is drenched in gold. Not the polished gold of a jewelry ad, but something warmer, Messier, like light caught on skin after a swim, or the hour before dusk when everything feels soft and significant. Director Will Gluck and cinematographer Danny Ruhlman understood something vital about this story. It had to feel alive. Not airbrushed. Not manufactured. But like something found. Sunlight caught in motion, breeze through open windows, warmth that feels earned. Sydney wasn't the original setting. The film, in early development, flirted with the idea of Italy, of classic European romance. But when production shifted to Australia, everything changed, for the better. Because Sydney, in all its laid-back contradiction, became the perfect metaphor for Bea and Ben themselves. Unpredictable, sharp-edged, beautiful in a way that doesn't beg for attention but commands it anyway. The city scenes, scattered throughout the early chapters of the film, are alive with texture. Cafes buzz with understated elegance. Street corners hum with traffic and laughter. The pacing is quick, jittery, mirroring the emotional push and pull of Bea and Ben's early interactions. They're trying to outrun their history. The camera agrees. It moves fast, handheld at times, framing them not with space, but with closeness. Crowds blur around them. The world doesn't pause. Neither do they. But then everything slows. Even more surprising were the emotional depth scenes. The quiet ones. In one hallway scene, Bea is meant to overhear Ben saying something she wasn't meant to hear. The shot was originally planned as a two-shot, both characters in frame. But just before they filmed, the cinematographer suggested something different. Film Bea through a glass door. Let her be obscured. Half visible. The idea clicked. Emotion just out of reach. The final scene was captured in one take, no words, no music. Only breathing. The creative team worked in constant tandem. Lighting cues were adjusted on the fly. The color grading plan shifted after dailies came in and the team realized that sunset on Sydney beaches created a kind of gold that couldn't be replicated with filters. The makeup team learned to keep shine, not blot it, because the sweat made the emotions more real. And through it all, the cast and crew bonded. Sydney and Glen became genuine friends off-screen. Not just co-stars, partners. She described him as the kind of actor who listens harder than he speaks. He called her a storm in heels. They played pranks on set, switching each other's script pages, replacing dialogue with Taylor Swift lyrics. During a break between scenes, Glen got the entire crew to sing Happy Birthday to Sydney's dog, who was visiting set. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She did both. When the shoot finally wrapped, there were no grand speeches. Just a quiet sunset. A clink of glasses. Glen gave every department head a copy of one of the Polaroids he'd taken, scrawled with inside jokes and thank-you notes. Sydney handed out handwritten letters, folded into origami hearts. The director gave everyone seashells from the beach, labeled with scene numbers. No one wanted to leave. But when the vans pulled away, the windows fogged with breath and memory, they knew what they'd made together. Not just a movie. A moment. And maybe that's why anyone but you landed the way it did. Why the film feels like more than its story. Because behind every kiss and quip, there was joy. Behind every sigh, every awkward silence, every sudden laugh, there were people who felt what they were building. Who trusted the chaos. Who said yes to risk, to love, to laughter that couldn't be faked. The light was always right. But the real glow? It came from the inside. And it never left. Absolutely. Here's a 2,500-word immersive and emotionally textured exploration of the themes and symbolism in Anyone But You, 2023, told like a winding story of ideas unfolding beneath the surface, with natural flow, cinematic tone, and deep narrative reflection. It starts with avoidance. With two people, seemingly polar opposites, spinning in their own carefully managed orbits. B, razor-sharp and emotionally meticulous, keeps the world at arm's length through logic, ambition, and sarcasm. Ben, quick-witted and disarmingly casual, floats through relationships with practiced charm and an aversion to anything that might demand too much. On the surface, Anyone But You is a romantic comedy, a whip-smart, sun-drenched spectacle of fake relationships, miscommunication, and sharp banter. But somewhere beneath the cleverness, beneath the laughter and longing, there's something deeper humming quietly, the universal fear of being known. From its very first scene, the film begins stitching its themes into place not with speeches or heavy dialogue, but through mood, color, and movement. One of the most prominent threads is the tension between control and surrender. B, as we come to understand, believes in structure. It's her armor. Her job, her wardrobe, her posture, even her jokes are built like fences. She doesn't let herself fall because she doesn't trust what comes after impact. Ben, on the other hand, embodies surrender on the surface. He jokes. He flirts. He flows with whatever moment he's in. But his surrender is performative. It's a disguise for a deeper fear that if he ever plants himself emotionally, he might be left behind. And so the story begins with two people who think they're navigating life safely, only to discover they've both built houses on sand. The fake relationship trope at the heart of the movie is more than a setup for comedy. It's a metaphor for all the ways we pretend in life. B and Ben are pretending to be in love, yes. But before that, they're pretending not to feel anything. They're pretending that what happened between them in the past, the misfires, the silences, the way they lingered on each other just a beat too long, was meaningless. Pretending becomes a form of survival, a shared language of denial. Symbolism quietly weaves through their interactions. The sun, for example, is constant, but it changes. Early in the film, sunlight is harsh and unfiltered, exposing rather than warming. It floods awkward encounters, casts sharp shadows on their arguments, makes them squint in discomfort. But as their relationship softens, so does the light. Golden hour begins to dominate the frame. Soft focus, warm edges, light that rests on skin instead of blinding it. The sun becomes a silent observer of their emotional evolution. It doesn't change them, but it reveals the changewater, too, plays a subtle but powerful symbolic role. The beachside wedding isn't just a backdrop, it's a metaphor for instability. Waves come and go. The tide shifts. Sand crumbles beneath feet. There's a scene where Bee stands alone at the edge of the sea, not saying a word, just watching. The camera lingers behind her, not intruding, letting the water lap around her ankles. It's not a dramatic moment, but it speaks volumes. The sea, endless and unknowable, reflects exactly what she's afraid of: vulnerability, depth, being swept away. Ben's turning point, likewise, is tied to water. The pool scene, where he jumps in during a chaotic reception speech, isn't just comic relief. It's an act of symbolic baptism. He submerges himself, fully clothed, letting go of pretense. Emerging soaked and messy, he abandons the version of himself who always had to look cool, in control, just out of reach. It's an emotional reset disguised as a punchline. At the heart of the film lies the theme of authenticity versus performance. Almost every character is performing something. The bride is performing perfection. The parents are performing tradition. Even the location, gorgeously curated and aesthetically ideal, becomes a symbol of the lives people try to curate for the sake of appearance. Bee and Ben's fake relationship begins as a performance to please others, to mask their discomfort, but it ends up exposing everything they'd rather hide. Their fake affection peels away real fear, real intimacy. The irony is clear. The moment they stop performing is the moment they actually begin. The script is filled with symbolic dialogue that brushes against these deeper ideas. Ben often uses humor as a shield, but once in a while, a line slips through that lands harder than it should. "You ever think maybe the reason it doesn't feel real is because you've never let it be?" he asks at one point, almost casually. Bee says nothing, but her silence says everything. It's the kind of line that lingers long after the scene ends, not because it's poetic, but because it's true. Silence itself becomes a theme. The film pivots away from concrete and steel and moves toward something softer. The coastal wedding setting, a sprawling estate that feels like a dream just barely tethered to reality. It's here that the cinematography opens up. Wide shots, rolling hills, the ocean stretching endlessly in the background. For the first time, the characters aren't trapped by their surroundings, they're exposed by them. There's nowhere to hide in this kind of light. The wedding venue itself is a study in contrast. On the surface, it's perfection. Manicured gardens, immaculate architecture, floral arrangements that seem too flawless to be real. But there are subtle details, intentional imperfections. A slightly chipped stone walkway. Chairs misaligned just enough to feel human. Sunlight that pours in too brightly during the ceremony, making guests squint. The message is clear. Even in carefully curated beauty, chaos finds its way in. Production designer Michael Turner spoke about this dynamic in interviews. "We wanted the space to feel like it belonged to the story, not just a backdrop, but a participant. The venue had to look like love, ambitious, a little messy, not quite symmetrical, but beautiful." And so it becomes more than just a location, it becomes pressure. For Bee, the perfection of the space mirrors the expectations she battles. Every chair set, every flower placed, is a reminder of the life path she's supposed to want. The kind of love that fits in picture frames. The kind that doesn't ask too many questions. And for Ben, the grandeur of it all is alien. He's more comfortable in worn t-shirts, in offhand jokes and low-stakes vulnerability. The venue confronts him too, not as a judgment, but as an invitation to imagine something he never thought he'd want. The ocean is everywhere. It wraps around the estate like a secret. Sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, always watching. It appears in nearly every important scene, not just visually but sonically. You hear it in the background. Waves crashing, wind rising, the soft rhythm of something ancient and endless. The sea, like love, is never still for long. And that metaphor, quiet and constant, is one of the film's most effective cinematic choices. There's a moment, just before the fake relationship crumbles into something too real to ignore, when Bea walks along the shoreline alone. The camera doesn't follow her immediately. It watches from a distance, letting her shrink into the landscape, her figure small against the waves. It's not sadness the film is showing, it's perspective. That in the face of something bigger than ourselves, all our walls and clever lines don't mean as much as we think they do. But for all its beauty, anyone but you doesn't rely solely on natural light. There's craftsmanship beneath the shimmer. Night scenes are lit with intention. The fire pit moment, where Bea and Ben finally share something real, is bathed in orange and shadow. Their faces flicker in and out of light. It's a visual metaphor for their emotional dance, inching closer, pulling away. The cinematography here is patient. It doesn't cut rapidly. It listens. It gives space for silence to say what words won't. And then there's the wedding reception, the crown jewel of the film's visual language. Twinkling lights strung above dance floors, lanterns swaying in the breeze, music pulsing softly beneath the surface. The entire space feels suspended in time, like the world has pressed pause just long enough for something true to happen. It's here that the camera becomes fluid. It doesn't document. It dances, moving with the characters, gliding past conversations, circling the moment Bea and Ben finally let the facade go. The dance sequence is deliberately imperfect, not choreographed to the beat, not staged for symmetry. It's awkward, real. Ben steps on her foot. Bea laughs too loudly. The music doesn't swell, it hums. And the camera captures it all in slow, drifting pans, as if afraid to break the spell. Critics praised this moment for its restraint, for its refusal to force emotion. It lets the audience feel it on their own. Elsewhere in the film, comedic scenes are staged with a completely different energy. Fast cuts, bold framing, a kinetic use of space. The infamous balcony scene, where Bea is forced to climb over shrubbery to avoid an awkward encounter, plays like a slapstick ballet. The camera whips, tilts, zooms in on reactions with millisecond timing. But even here, nothing feels cartoonish. The visual choices are rooted in character, in Bea's desperation, in Ben's unspoken glee. Color, too, tells a story early in the film. Bea wears structure, sharp silhouettes, cool tones. Ben wears ease, earthy colors, layers that feel lived in. But as their walls fall, their palettes shift. Bea's clothes soften, linen, blushes, navy blue. Ben sharpens ever so slightly. The two meet in the middle. It's a subtle arc, but it mirrors their emotional journey. Costume designer Lizzie Gardner said it best: "We didn't want the audience to notice the change. We wanted them to feel it." And then there's the use of reflections. Mirrors appear often, but rarely in ways we expect. Bea's reflection in a window as she listens to Ben talk about love. Ben's reflection in water, rippling as he watches her walk away. These shots are quiet, almost forgettable. But they're doing something vital. They're showing us what the characters can't yet admit, that they're seeing themselves differently through each other. The editing style honors this introspection. Transitions aren't flashy. They linger. Scenes fade rather than cut. Time stretches in emotional moments, compresses in chaos. The pacing of the film adapts to the emotional state of the leads. When they're disconnected, the film feels fast, fragmented. When they begin to open up, the rhythm slows. You breathe with them. The soundtrack is no afterthought either. Rather than dominate, the score supports. Acoustic themes recur, variations on a single melody that grows more layered as the relationship deepens. And when silence hits, it hits hard. No score swells during the breakup. No violins when they walk away. Just the sound of footsteps, wind, regret. The film knows when not to speak. In the end, the setting of Anyone But You isn't just a place. It's a state of mind. It reflects the emotional landscape of the characters in every frame. The heat of conflict, the stillness of longing, the unexpected calm of surrender. The visual language tells the love story just as clearly as the script does, sometimes more. And that's the genius of its cinematic elements. They don't shout. They whisper. They shimmer. They show us a world that feels like ours, but more vivid, more awake. A place where the sun always finds its way through the clouds. Where every glance carries weight. Where love doesn't arrive in perfection, but in pieces, scattered across beach paths and garden lights and wind-blown balconies. This wasn't just a rom-com. It was a visual poem. In a film filled with snappy comebacks and layered verbal sparring, the pauses hold the most weight. There are scenes where no one speaks for nearly a full minute. Where looks replace words, and the soundtrack drops away, letting emotion hang unfiltered in the air. These silences, like unmarked graves, hold all the things the characters are afraid to say. And the audience feels them. They're the spaces between heartbeats, the emotional static that reminds us what real connection looks like. Another quietly powerful theme in the film is the idea of emotional inheritance. Bea is surrounded by people telling her what love should look like. Her parents speak in clichés. Her sister's wedding becomes a blueprint she's expected to follow. And yet, none of it fits. She watches the rehearsal dinners, the speeches, the rituals, and it all feels like costume. Ben, too, has inherited a model of romance that doesn't suit him. Effortless charm, temporary heat, no long-term risks. They're both haunted by templates that don't match who they are. And their relationship becomes, in its clumsy, chaotic way, an act of rebellion. A choice to write a new story, even if it scares them. Symbolism is also found in the environment they occupy. Mirrors appear often throughout the film. Not as set decoration, but as emotional devices. Characters are often framed in reflection, off windows, glasses, water. One of the most poignant uses is when Bea hears Ben say something kind about her when he doesn't know she's listening. She watches him through a glass door, her face half hidden by glare. It's a cinematic mirror. She sees him clearly, but we only see her partially. That's the metaphor, seeing someone else clearly while still being unclear about yourself. Even costume choices carry symbolic resonance. Bea's clothing is structured, fitted, neutral in tone. Her wardrobe mirrors her emotional rigidity. But as the film unfolds, colors begin to emerge. Soft fabrics. Looser silhouettes. She doesn't dress differently because she's trying to change, but because she is changing, and the shift expresses itself before she can articulate it. Ben, on the other hand, begins the film slightly disheveled, mismatched, emotionally scattered. As he becomes more grounded, so does his appearance. Not formal, just more intentional. One of the most fascinating thematic undercurrents is the role of timing. Nearly every major beat in the film is defined not by content, but by when it happens. A confession that comes too late. A kiss interrupted. A realization that only arrives after the window has closed. Timing, in the world of Anyone But You, is both villain and teacher. The film doesn't shy away from this discomfort. It sits in it, letting the characters feel the sting of almost and the ache of not yet. But then, because this is still a romance, it allows them a second chance. A do-over. A moment of courage not rushed, but earned. In one of the film's final scenes, Ben doesn't make a grand romantic speech. He doesn't stand in the rain or hijack a plane. He simply asks Bea if she wants to dance. No metaphors. No declarations. Just presence. Just a choice. It's in this moment that the film's themes converge. Vulnerability over performance. Surrender over control. Honesty over wit. Love, not as a lightning strike, but as a slow unlearning of fear. And yet, perhaps the most poignant theme of all is the idea that love doesn't fix you, it simply makes you brave enough to face yourself. By the end of the film, Bea and Ben aren't transformed into perfect partners. They're still sarcastic, still scared, still a little ridiculous. But they've chosen each other. Not as a solution, but as a partner in the chaos. And that's what the film ultimately celebrates. Not love as perfection, but love as witness. As someone who stays. Who sees. Who hears the silence and doesn't try to fill it, but stays long enough for it to become music. Anyone but you may be packaged in glossy comedy and beautiful people and witty dialogue. But beneath it lies a beating heart of raw humanity. It's about all the ways we pretend, all the ways we hide, and all the fragile, beautiful chances we get to be real, if only we're brave enough to take them. The themes don't announce themselves. They whisper. They shimmer like sunlight on water, easy to miss if you're not looking, unforgettable once you've seen them. And when the credits roll and the music fades, what remains isn't just a love story. It's a reminder that letting yourself be seen is terrifying. But it's the only way to be loved. And sometimes, the person you least expect, the one who annoys you, challenges you, mirrors back your worst fears, ends up being the one who stays. Not despite who you are, but because of it. Absolutely. Here's a 2,500-word immersive and flowing narrative that explores the filmmaking techniques and box office production behind Anyone But You, 2023. Told like a story unfolding behind the camera, filled with cinematic texture, emotion, and the delicate craft that shaped the film's heart and atmosphere. There's a certain kind of film that feels effortless. That moves like sunlight across a quiet afternoon, brushing against the skin so lightly you almost don't notice you're being warmed. Anyone But You is that kind of film. But like any truly effortless experience, it was meticulously crafted behind the scenes. Built moment by moment, frame by frame, in a dance between instinct and precision. While the world fell for the chemistry, the charm, the comedy, few saw the complex machine humming just beneath the glow. And in that quiet machinery, the filmmaking techniques, the structural choices, the unglamorous grind, lies the real magic from the beginning. Director Gluck approached Anyone But You with a vision not of reinvention, but of refinement. He didn't want to reinvent the romantic comedy. He wanted to restore it, to remind audiences what it felt like to laugh, to long, to lean into a love story that wasn't afraid to be beautiful, even as it was messy. But to make it feel modern, grounded, and alive, Gluck and his team had to choose their tools carefully. One of the most striking choices was the use of natural light. Filmed across sun-drenched corners of Sydney, Australia, the cinematography, helmed by Danny Ruhlman, was designed to embrace the unpredictability of the real world. Rather than rely heavily on artificial rigs and digital filters, Ruhlman let the environment dictate the mood. When sunlight flared across the lens, it stayed. When clouds passed in the middle of a take, they were welcomed. The result was a film that breathed. A film that shimmered and softened not with polish, but with truth. Scenes were often shot during golden hour, when the world hangs in that perfect balance between day and dusk. You can feel it in the frame, the long shadows, the amber glow, the way faces seem to light from within. But this choice came with challenges. Timing had to be precise. Locations had to be prepped in advance. And actors had to find their emotional beats in narrow windows. But it paid off. Because every tender scene in Anyone But You, from beachside confessions to balcony glances, feels kissed by something more than good lighting. It feels kissed by time. Camera movement was another subtle but powerful choice. Early scenes, especially those capturing Bea and Ben's initial awkward encounters, were often filmed with handheld techniques. Slight shakes. Imperfect framing. The world feels just a little unsteady, like them. As their dynamic evolves, the camera steadies too. Tracking shots become smoother. One particularly clever technique is the use of shallow focus. Throughout the film, close-ups often blur the background, isolating B or Ben in their own emotional world. But when they're together, really together, the focus deepens. The background becomes clear. The world, for once, sharpens around them. It's an invisible storytelling device, but it creates a feeling that's impossible to miss. A sense that clarity comes not from solitude, but from connection. Editing, handled with surgical precision by Tia Nolan, played a central role in shaping the film's rhythm. Rom-coms often live or die by their timing, not just comedic beats, but emotional ones. And in Anyone But You, that timing is pitch perfect. Dialogue is allowed to breathe. Pauses land with weight. But the real genius lies in the transitions. Scenes bleed into one another with a softness that mirrors the characters' guarded unfolding. No jarring cuts. No forced momentum. Just a gentle unfolding, like a letter being read slowly in warm light. One of the most effective sequences comes mid-film, during the wedding rehearsal dinner. The editing here dances between characters, catching stolen glances, unfinished sentences, unspoken tension. A laugh here. A sigh there. The camera doesn't linger too long on any one face. Instead, it weaves, observes, creates the sense of a world alive with emotion just beneath the surface. And when Ben finally stands to speak, fumbling, vulnerable, human, the edit slows. Time stretches. We're asked to feel with him, not just watch. Sound design, often overlooked in films like this, is quietly masterful. The soundtrack is minimal, often acoustic, organic, underscoring emotion without manipulating it. Composer Este Hayam, of Hayam fame, and producer Chris Stracy created a score that feels more like memory than music. Guitar strings, soft piano, breath-like synths. These weren't songs you'd hum walking out of the theater. They were sounds that made moments feel like the thud of your heart when someone touches your hand for the first time. But even more effective than the music is the use of silence. Anyone But You understands that not every moment needs to be filled. Some of the most powerful scenes, be alone in her room, Ben watching her from across a garden, are silent. No dialogue. No score. Just ambient noise. Wind. Footsteps. Breathing. It's a rare confidence to let nothingness speak. But in those spaces, the characters reveal everything they're afraid to say. Production design leaned into contrast. BEA's world, structured, minimalist, elegant, is reflected in her environment. Clean lines. Cool tones. Ben's spaces are warmer, messier, more tactile. As their lives collide, those spaces begin to overlap. A jacket draped on the wrong chair. A drink ring left on a table. The visual design tells the story of two lives slowly bleeding into one another. No voiceover required. One especially clever touch is the use of doorways and windows. B is often framed in thresholds, between rooms, behind glass, next to half-closed doors. It's visual language for someone caught between who she is and who she's afraid to become. Ben, by contrast, is always in motion. Open spaces. Walk and talks. Movement without destination. But their most honest moments happen when they stop. When they're still. The camera knows this, and it lingers. The wardrobe design, led by Lizzie Gardner, subtly arcs with the characters. B begins the film in form-fitting neutrals, Ben in wrinkled pastels. As the story progresses, B softens. Cardigans replace blazers. Flow replaces structure. Ben, meanwhile, begins to wear deeper colors, more structure, still casual, but considered. It's not about fashion. It's about psychology. A visual echo of their emotional evolution. Even props carry emotional weight. A notebook filled with half-written thoughts. A borrowed jacket that's never returned. A glass of wine that's refilled before a word is spoken. The objects in the frame aren't just decoration. They're emotional cues. Silent partners in the storytelling. The way Ben gently turns a bracelet on his wrist when he's anxious. The way Bea runs her finger along the rim of a wine glass when she's trying not to cry. These are human things. Unscripted, maybe, but unforgettable. And then, of course, there's the ocean. Always present. Always changing. Sometimes calm, sometimes stormy. A metaphor, yes, but also a character. The sound of it hums beneath scenes. Its reflection flickers on windows. It surrounds the estate like a boundary they cannot cross until they change. When Bea walks into the waves alone, it's not just a beach scene. It's surrender. When Ben jumps into the pool, it's not just comedy. It's rebirth. Water in this film isn't just an element. It's an invitation. The wedding, the film's centerpiece, was constructed with logistical precision, shot over multiple days with a rotating group of extras and real musicians. It required choreographed movement between actors, lights, cameras, and live reactions. But none of that is felt. What comes through on screen is warmth. The feeling that you, the viewer, have been invited not to a scene, but to an event. And that's the film's secret sauce. It doesn't just show us things. It includes us. Makes us feel part of the emotional architecture. And what did it all lead to? A film that, despite being a mid-budget romantic comedy in a market dominated by blockbusters and franchises, found its footing. Slowly. Organically. It didn't open with fanfare. It didn't dominate headlines. But something rare happened, word of mouth. People talked. They returned. They told friends, who told more friends. Social media exploded with fan edits, quotes, analysis. Box office expectations were modest. But week after week, the film held strong. It didn't drop off. It grew. Eventually surpassing projections, becoming a quiet hit not just financially, but emotionally. It reminded studios that people do still want love stories. That audiences crave connection. That there's room in the cinematic landscape for films that aren't loud, but that speak clearly, honestly, and beautifully. And maybe that's the real legacy of Anyone But You. Not just the clever lines or the beachside kisses, but the way it made people feel seen. The way it proved that craftsmanship, careful cinematography, intuitive editing, restrained sound, and emotionally intelligent performances can still come together to create something lasting. Because behind every effortless scene was 100 decisions. Behind every moment of intimacy, 100 hours of planning. Behind every beat of laughter, 100 edits to find the truth. It wasn't accidental. It was alchemy. And it reminded everyone watching, on set or in the theater, that great filmmaking doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just feels right. Like the moment you stop pretending. And finally let yourself fall.